Good morning, church. I know we can't be in person, but we're gathered online. Real quick, before we get into our text this morning, I have some good news to share with you all. You might have already found out via social media, but Piper and I, we've been married for 4.5 years, and for those 4.5 years, we have wanted a dog so badly, and I'm happy to announce that last week, we got our brand new puppy. Here she is. Here's what she looks like. Let's just take a look. Man, I wish you were all in person because I know we'd be hearing the "aw" because she's so cute, right? Her cuteness, I say this in a good way, it truly is overwhelming. And her name's Lola, just so you know. She's so adorable. But here's the thing. She's an amazing dog. We've had her for a week. She's 9.5 weeks right now. And she's cute, right? But there's certain times in the day, especially early in the morning at like 4 or 5 a.m., where she gets this look in her eye, and it's like another dog takes over her body. And I don't know what it is, but I call this chew time, okay? In Lola's chew time, here's what's on the menu, okay? We have metal. She likes metal. She chews metal. She chews cardboard, wood, shoes, clothes, plastic, chew toys, of course, chew toys. Those are kind of on the bottom of her list. But then at the very top of the menu, at the top of the food chain, she loves to chew, you guessed it, human skin. I don't know what it is, but she is out for blood. Even this morning, it was like 5:30. She comes on her bed, and she just starts biting our skin. I'm like, Lola, what are you doing? But then I see how cute she is, and I don't even care because she's just so adorable. But here's the deal. When you have a puppy, it's like they just like to bite things, right? And they just chew, and they just gnaw on things, and it's just crazy. And I pray that she will grow out of that. But here's the thing. Over here, and I know in person it'd probably be a little easier to see these things, so I'll do my best to show this with the camera that we have. But over here I have a cord. This is my actual phone charger that I use. It's by my bedside. And this is what a cord would look like. If you could see, there's exposed wires. The rubber is peeling off. I had to replace this, whatever this thing's called, with a new thingy. But this is what this cord would look like if Lola chewed it. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Lola did not actually chew this cord. We make sure she doesn't chew cords. Don't want her to get electrocuted. But I wanted an excuse this morning to talk about my new puppy. So there's that. But I do have to say, as hard as it is, we got to take our attention off of Lola. And now I want to draw our attention to this cord, okay? So this cord, this is an old cord. I've had it for years. And I'm the type of guy who I will wear things out until they break or until I have to buy something new. And so this cord's very old. But it still works, okay? If you could see it up close, it's not all white. It's very discolored, all right? There's exposed wires. Again, there's a new like charging port, whatever you call this thing. But it's not like the newest, strongest cord, but it still does charge. But over here, I have a brand new charger. There's nothing wrong with this one. It works perfectly fine. It's all white, right? There's no exposed wires. It's strong. It's newer. All those things. Now, if I were to ask you, which cord would you rather have? Would you rather have the cord with exposed wires, that's discolored, that's older, that might be a little more weak, or would you rather have the brand new cord that's all white? Which would you choose? Well, I think all of us, if we were smart, we would choose the brand new cord, right? It's newer, it's probably going to last longer, all of those things. Now, over here on this table, I also have a couple of outlets because if you're going to charge your phone, you can have a cord, but you got to plug it into an outlet, right? And so on this table, I don't know if you can see it super well, so I'll just verbally explain this, but we have this outlet right here, and there's a green check mark, and this outlet represents an outlet that works, that has power. So if you take a cord and you plug it into this outlet, it's going to charge your phone, okay? So this one's closest to me. This outlet represents one that works. It's got green above it. And you guessed it, this red one has an X above it, and this represents an outlet that has no power. It doesn't work. So it doesn't matter what kind of cord you plug into it, there's no power. So again, this one's farther away from me. This is the one that does not work. Now, here's the deal. What if I took this beat-up cord with exposed wires, the rubber peeling off, this old, weaker wire, and I put it and paired it with the outlet that works? And then, what if I took the brand new cord and charger and I put this next to the outlet that doesn't work? Now, if I asked you which pair would you rather have the working outlet with the exposed wire cord, or would you rather have the broken outlet that has no power with the brand new cord, you'd probably choose this pair, right? You would choose the pair with the working outlet and the older, frayed, the cord with the exposed wires, because the most important thing in this pairing is not the wire itself, it's the outlet. Now, this morning as we get into our text, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 17, verses 14 through 21. And Jesus is going to talk about this concept when it comes to our faith. We're going to see Jesus heal a demon-possessed boy. And what we're going to see is when it comes to our faith, it's not necessarily all about the strength of our faith, what it looks like, the size of it, all these different things, whether it's like a bad cord or a really good cord. The most important thing about our faith is the object of our faith, what our faith is being put into. It's more like the outlet. And so we're going to see this concept play throughout this morning. We're going to see the meaning of our text and the difference that it makes in each of our lives. Now, in order to do that, we're going to start in verse 14. And when we talk about, whenever we're in the gospel accounts, I like to say this, especially with the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all very similar. It's like you can read all three different accounts and read the same story. And a lot of times they're sharing about the same event, but from maybe a different perspective, or they're writing it to a different audience. And so what happens is when we read, especially this account, which is in all three synoptic gospels, and you read them together, it's like it gives you a more full picture of what's going on. And so as we read Matthew, we're also going to read Mark and Luke a little bit, and we're going to reference that just to get a fuller picture of what's happening here in our story. And so it's interesting to start us off in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. All three gospel accounts, this story comes directly after the transfiguration. In fact, Luke's account, as we're doing this, right, getting a fuller picture, it says that this event, Jesus healing this demon-possessed boy, took place the day after the transfiguration. So it's almost like the authors, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, want us to understand something. It's like last week, as Pastor Michael preached through the text, we got to see the glory of God on high, on this mountain, and now it's like he comes down and we get to see the glory of God in everyday life, below, on the bottom of the mountain. And so picture this, right? Last week we learned that Peter, James, John, and Jesus, they were all up on this mountain. Peter, James, and John, they saw the glory of God before their eyes. They saw two men who had been dead for hundreds of years talking with Jesus, and they heard the very voice of God come from the clouds. Like, what an amazing experience, right? And then the very next day, they walk down the mountain with Jesus, and they see this crowd full of scribes and full of this father that we'll learn about, and the other disciples, and there's chaos and there's arguing. And so they go from this amazing experience right on this mountain to now this stressful, kind of chaotic situation. And this is where our text picks up this morning in verse 14. So here's what it says. It says, "And when they came to the crowd, a man came up to him being Jesus, and kneeling before him said, 'Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic, and he suffers terribly. For often he falls into the fire, and often into the water.'" So there's this loving father, and he approaches Jesus about his son. So here's the situation. His son, this boy, has epilepsy. And we find out as we read the text, the boy is demon-possessed. And the text tells us in Matthew's account that this demon would throw the boy into fire and water, and you could only think this boy had to have near-death experiences, right? Where he almost burned to death, he almost drowned to death, just scary things happening to him. In fact, if he's getting thrown into fire, you know he has to have scars all over his body from being burned, like just brutal. Now, as we, again, look at the synoptic gospels and kind of get a fuller picture of what's going on, Mark's gospel tells us that the demon, when it would convulse this boy, he would fall down to the ground, foam would come out of his mouth, and he would grind his teeth, right, so that they'd be dull. He would just grind them. And Luke's account, it tells us that this son, this was the father's only child. And so you get this picture of this young boy who needs to be delivered, right, from this demon, and this father who loves his son, sees him in pain, and he's approaching Jesus and saying, "Have mercy on my son," heal him. Now, here's our first point that we see, okay? And if you have your sermon notes, you can fill this in. But human beings need deliverance. Human beings need deliverance. We just saw Jesus, and we beheld his glory last week on the mountain when he was transfigured, and now we see his glory manifest itself in everyday life where he's here, but he's in the midst of a world where there's brokenness, right? There's this demon-possessed boy he's in pain, he's getting thrown into fire and water, he convulses, all of these different things, but he needs to be delivered. And obviously not everyone needs to be delivered from a demon, although that does happen, but all of us need deliverance, right? Whether it's from addiction, whether it's from chronic pain, whether it's from sin, human beings by nature, we need to be delivered. And so this father understands that for his son, and he wants that. And so here's the thing. In order for him to get deliverance for his son, he first went to the disciples. And look what happens when he went to the disciples in verse 16. He said, and again, he's talking to Jesus. He says, "And I brought him, his son, to your disciples, and they could not heal him." So think about this loving father, this son in pain, and he wants deliverance for his boy. He brings it to the disciples, eager and hopeful that they'll heal him. And the disciples could not cast out the demon. They could not heal the boy. Now, about 5 years ago, my wife and I, we started drinking kombucha. At first, I was really skeptical of kombucha because there's this thing called the SCOBY, and it's got like weird tentacles coming down into your drink, and it's just really weird and gross looking. And that kind of stuff just freaks me out. But I got past that, and I was encouraged to try it, and so I tried it, and I just really enjoyed kombucha. And so my wife and I, we got kombucha, or we got a SCOBY. And side note, we actually nicknamed our SCOBY Scoby Bryant. We named it after Kobe Bryant. And our SCOBY, it got really big, and we started making lots of kombucha, and it was really good. We would put it in little bottles, but then we had these 1.5 liter bottles. And when I like a drink or food, it's hard for me to have self-control. And so what I would do is I would take the 1.5 liters, and I would just drink that all within like an hour. And I would do that on a regular basis. And all the while, I didn't realize that kombucha is not like root beer or water. It's actually got bacteria in it, right? And so there was one day where I was drinking it, and all of a sudden, I had this really bad pain. And it takes me a lot to go to the hospital, like a lot. Like, I just don't go there. And so, but I was at a point, I'm not kidding you, this is not hyperbolic in any sort of sense, but this was the worst physical pain I've ever experienced. There was something in my intestinal area. I was in so much pain, I had to go to the hospital, so I said, "Piper, we got to go." Well, she convinced me, and then we went, and we go there, right? And so I need some healing. I need something to help me because I'm in so much pain because I overdrank the kombucha. And so we drive in hopes to the urgent care to get some sort of help, and I remember we pulled up, right? And we had talked on the phone with our insurance, and they said, "Okay, you can go to this location." So we went there, and the urgent care was closed. I was like, we were just so, not just shocked, but we were very angry, right, and stressed. It was like I needed to experience some sort of relief, but it was closed. And then we had to go to the place I never want to go to. We had to go to the ER and wait in line. But it all got situated. Turns out it was just a really bad intestinal infection from the kombucha. So, quick application point, don't drink too much kombucha. But all this to say, this is similar kind of to the father's urgency here. It's like his son is in pain, kind of like when I was in pain, and he goes to the disciples expecting that they can heal his son, and he's eager and he's hopeful, and it's like, nope, store's closed, hospital's closed, there's no healing here. And now he's like, well, what do we do? I got to have healing for my son. He needs to be delivered from this demon. And so he sees Jesus and Peter, James, and John walking down the mountain after the transfiguration, and now he's approaching Jesus. And so you can almost sense the urgency here, the desperation, the love that he has for his son, and we're going to see what Jesus does about it. But before we see that, quick thing, I want you to put this question in the back of your mind, okay? Just remember this question. Why couldn't the disciples heal the boy? That's a huge, important question that we'll find out at the end of our text. It's really the big question of the entire passage this morning. But we just learned human beings need deliverance. Here's point number 2. Here's what we learn about Jesus. Jesus has the power to deliver. Jesus has the power to deliver. And we're going to see that within our text this morning. And verse 17 says this, "And Jesus answered, O faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Now, those seem like some pretty stern and harsh words, and the question is, who is Jesus addressing here? Is he addressing the disciples who couldn't heal the boy? Is he addressing the Father? Is he addressing the crowd that's full of scribes? I would argue that Jesus is specifically addressing the crowd that is full of scribes. Now, the way that I would conclude that is if you read again, we get a fuller picture when we put the synoptic gospels together. Mark's account, it appears that when Jesus says this, he is directly addressing the crowd. Also, when he talks about this generation, it's like he's talking about a group of people that exist during a certain period of time, and it's like this crowd and these people at this time, they've seen Jesus do countless miracles, they've heard him speak, and it's like they still just don't understand who he is. They still don't believe who he is and what he can do. And so this is what Jesus says, O faithless and twisted or perverse generation. Now, here's what Jesus says in the last part of verse 17. He says, bring him here to me. So he says, bring the boy here, the demon-possessed boy that the disciples couldn't heal, bring him to me. And here's what happens in verse 18, right? We're going to see Jesus has the power to deliver. It says, and Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the boy was healed instantly. So the boy comes in front of Jesus. Jesus rebukes the demon, and it doesn't say it took a week or two to heal the boy. It says the boy was healed instantly. In fact, if you read Mark's account, it says the moment that the boy even came into the presence of Jesus, the demon convulsed the boy, he fell down, foamed out of his mouth, and was grinding his teeth. So it's like even before Jesus spoke a word, the demon shuddered before the presence of Jesus. Talk about beholding the glory of God in the darkness and in the ugliness of life. He's right there, and we see God's glory on display. Now, we have to understand here that Jesus has the power to deliver. We've seen that countless times throughout Matthew, and we see it again. Now, here's the important question. I'll go back to it, what I said earlier. Why couldn't the disciples heal this boy? Why couldn't they cast out the demon? Now, they're asking the same question. Look at verse 19. It says, then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, why could we not cast it out? Just like we want to know, they wanted to know, why couldn't they cast this demon out? Now, if you remember, I always say this to our students on Wednesday nights. What's one of the most important things when reading the Bible? And they always say context, because context is important. And if you go back to Matthew chapter 10, specifically verse 8, we see that Jesus commissioned his disciples to go into to the lost, right? To heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, and cast out demons. In fact, he gave them authority to do those things. So they had done these things before. They've cast out demons before. They've healed people before. So why couldn't they do it now? That's a big question. Now, you know, people say, like, WWJD, what would Jesus do? Now, I think we should ask ourselves, WWJS, what would Jesus say? Like, if we were in this situation before reading the rest of the text, what would Jesus say to the disciples? Why couldn't they heal the boy? Why couldn't they cast out the demon? And maybe if we put ourselves in Jesus' shoes or we guess what he might say, we might say he would say something like this. Disciples, you guys, you needed way more faith. Your faith was too small. You needed to grow it. It needed to be more and bigger and stronger. You needed better faith. That's one thing we might say, or he might say. You might think he'd say something kind of more negative and say, man, your faith is just too weak. It's too small, right? It's like this cord and it's beat up. Your wires are exposed. You need to strengthen those loose ends and all those things. So we could think of a lot of things Jesus might say, but let's see what he actually said in verse 20. And verse 20 is the key to learning why the disciples could not heal the boy. And this is where we're going to get the main point of our text this morning. So verse 20, it says this. He responds. It says, he said to them, because of your little faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. Now, the word little faith in verse 20, when he says it's because of your little faith that you could not heal this boy, or cast out this demon. The word in Greek is better translated as unbelief. There's a couple of other passages that I would reference, Matthew 13:58 and Mark 16:14. These are two other passages that use the same Greek word, but in their context is translated as unbelief. And in this context, I would say it's better translated as unbelief than of little faith. Now, if it was little faith, right, like their faith was just too little and they needed more faith, Jesus would seem to contradict himself here, because look at verse 20. He says, because of your little faith, for truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed. Now, can we show the picture of the mustard seed? Now, that's an actual mustard seed on someone's hand. It's tiny, it's minuscule. It was the smallest agricultural seed that they would have been familiar with. Now, Jesus is saying they just needed a minuscule, tiny amount of faith that was placed in Jesus to heal this boy. So it wouldn't make sense for Jesus to say, you couldn't heal this boy because you had a little bit of faith, but then if you have a little bit of faith, you could have healed this boy. It just doesn't make sense, right? But what he says is, it's better translated again as, because of your unbelief. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like a mustard seed. Now, if you look at this, it's just super interesting. It's not that Jesus is saying they had too little faith, or if this represented their faith and it was beat up and weak, he's not like it was too small or too weak. In fact, what Jesus is saying here is they couldn't heal the boy, not because of weak faith, but because of misplaced faith. And there's a big, big difference. He said, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, like if I had a mustard seed on my finger, you probably couldn't see it unless you were here in person. Well, that's how small it. We just saw that on the screen. He says you could move mountains. You would say this mountain move, and it would move. But notice Jesus didn't say this to the disciples. Jesus didn't say, man, if you have faith the size of mountains, then you can move mountains. He doesn't talk about mountain-sized faith. He talks about faith the size of a mustard seed, a minuscule, tiny, little mustard seed. And what he's saying is, if you would have placed faith that, just like the size of a mustard seed that fits on your fingertip, in me, the one whose glory shined before you, Peter, James, and John, right, on the mountain when I was transfigured, the one who demons shudder even at my presence, the one who could heal people instantaneously and who can rebuke demons, if you would have put even a minuscule amount of faith in me, then you could have healed the boy. Then you could have cast out the demon. And so what the disciples are learning here is it's really not about the strength and the size of their faith. Is it like a cord that's all beat up, or is it like a brand new one that's more strong and it looks better? Jesus said it's not about the strength or the size of your faith, it's about the object of your faith, right? It's like the outlet, what the cord is being plugged into. And so here's what we learn about mountain-moving faith. Do you want mountain-moving faith, right? I do. But here's what we learn. This is point number 3. Mountain-moving faith is minuscule faith in a mighty God. I'll say it again because that's important for us to understand. Mountain-moving faith is minuscule faith in a mighty God. For the disciples, they might have had a lot of faith while trying to heal this boy. Right? Their cord might have looked really good like this one, but their faith was placed in the wrong outlet. Right? Their faith went from upward to inward. They went into self-reliance, self-dependence mode. And so because of this, it's like their cord, even if it was strong, it was plugged into the wrong outlet. And if it's plugged into an outlet that has no power, it's powerless. It doesn't matter how good or how strong the cord is. And so the disciples are learning this. Now, our text this morning is verse 14 through 21, and we preach and read through the ESV Bible. And so if you have an ESV Bible, you realize there's no verse 21. You're like, where did it go? Some translations don't have it, some do. And there are different scholars who debate, and they say, man, is verse 21 in the original manuscripts? Was it added because of Mark's gospel? What do we do with that? Well, let me just bring some comfort here, no matter where you land on that. If verse 21 really isn't in the text, the meaning of this passage remains the same. If verse 21 is in this text, it only reinforces the original point of this passage, because it's precisely, verse 21, how the end of Mark, that account for this story, concludes. It's precisely the same thing. But here's verse 21, what it says. Jesus concludes and he says, "But this kind, this demon, does not go out except by prayer and fasting." Jesus said this specific demon could only be cast out by prayer and fasting. If you're a self-sufficient, self-dependent person, you probably don't pray or fast a whole lot, right? This 30 days of contemplation in the month of May, we've been in continuous prayer about the building project. We've been fasting on Thursdays. These are things that we're doing to call upon God, to depend on him. But again, if you're a self-reliant, self-dependent person, you probably don't pray or fast a whole lot. And so what Jesus is saying is, he's not like, man, you guys, you needed greater faith. You had tiny faith, you need mountain-sized faith. He says you need a minuscule amount of faith, just a little bit, placed in a mighty God, and then mountains would be moved. And so he says is you need to redirect your faith in me. And friends, let me just pause and say this should be a huge relief to us. Like this passage, what Jesus is saying should be a huge relief. I look at this beat up cord, and I'll probably use it for however many more years it lasts me, unless Lola gets it. But you look at this cord, like if this represents our faith, it's maybe a little bit, it feels a little bit more weak. The wires are exposed. It's more beat up. It's older. Like maybe you look at this and maybe you say, man, my faith has felt like this cord. It doesn't feel like a brand new one that looks strong and there's like no defects and it's flawless, but it feels flawed and it feels weak at times. I don't know about you, but there are times where I've definitely felt like this cord. I felt like my faith has been challenged. It was weaker. And if you're like me, then you felt like that as well. Maybe you feel like your faith is hanging on by a thread. But friends, I want us to be encouraged this morning by this text. And I've been praying throughout this week that we be encouraged by it. Because it's not about how mighty our faith is, whether it looks like this or whether it looks like this cord. It's not about that. It's about how mighty our God is, right? It's more about the outlet than it is about the cord. It's more about the mightiness of God than it is about the mightiness of our own faith. And here's the thing. If faith is our main focus and just growing our faith and it's all about our faith, then we start operating under the mindset where we say, man, I just got to muster up enough faith, right? Man, I just got to pull myself up by the bootstraps and believe even more so in God and believe more and have more faith. But here's the deal. If that's our main thing, if we're more focused on the cord than the outlet, on our faith than on God, then you know what becomes the object of our faith? It's no longer God, it's our faith. Our faith then becomes the object of our faith. And that's when we shift from dependence on God to self-dependent, self-reliant mode. And so I just want to encourage us all to keep God as the focal point, as the object of our faith. And when we do that, we're going to be more focused on how mighty God is and less focused on how mighty we think that our faith has to become. Now, all of this has to beg the question, what if I do place my faith in God? What if I even do have a minuscule amount of faith placed in a mighty God? Can I really move mountains? Is there really nothing that's impossible for me, as Jesus just said, right? I'm quoting the words of Jesus. Now, I know it's Memorial Day weekend, so maybe you're going to Mount Baker. I don't know. But if you do go to Mount Baker and you want to test Jesus' theory, you might go there and say, God, I believe in you. I trust you. Please move Mount Baker and prove yourself. I guarantee you if you do that, Mount Baker's not going to move, right? It's going to stay there. Jesus is not saying you can actually move mountains. The point that he's making is when we put even a small amount of faith in a mighty God, amazing things happen. If we just based our lives and our faith off of verse 20, I think we'd be pretty tired, maybe frustrated or angry at times, because if we only took verse 20 and lived our life based off of that, not only could we have a misplaced faith, but we'd also have a misguided faith. And both are very dangerous, and we need to be aware of that. Jesus says, if you have a minuscule amount of faith placed in me, nothing will be impossible for you. And so look at the Bible, and there's countless examples where there are times where God heals certain people and other people he doesn't heal. Where God allows some people to live long and prosperous lives and others, their lives are cut short. It's like, why does that happen, right? If we just have enough faith, won't all of us be healed and all of us live long and prosperous lives? Well, the answer is no. You look at the example of Paul, the Apostle Paul, who wrote much of the New Testament, and he pleaded with God multiple times and said, God, please remove this thorn from my side. And God said no. And you're like, God denied his request. He said no to Paul. Was that because Paul had misplaced faith? Absolutely not. It's because God chose not to heal him and take the thorn away from his side. But then you see other stories like the one this morning where a father comes in desperation and out of love for his son, and Jesus chooses to heal that boy, and he's healed instantly. And so when we read this text, I don't know why there are certain times where God heals certain people and other times he doesn't. I don't know why certain times people's lives are cut short and other times they live long and prosperous lives. I don't know, right? I don't know. But I do know that everything that happens in this life, it's couched solely in the goodness and sovereignty of God. And you're like, man, but that isn't like, that's kind of a tough truth to wrestle with. But I think when we realize that, it reminds us that the point of this passage, it's not about our faith and what it can do. It's about the object of our faith, God, and what he can do. And it reminds us of that truth. And so as we get to the end of this passage, it brings us to our big idea this morning. What is this all about? And here it is. We don't need great faith. We need faith in a great God. We don't need great faith. We need faith in a great God. As I've studied the text this week and been praying through it, this text, this big idea that we get from our text has been a huge encouragement for me. In a few days, on June 2nd, my wife and I, that was going to be our due date for our baby. And unfortunately, as many of you know, Piper and I, we lost our baby daughter almost 4 months ago on February 7th. Her name is Penelope. And after we lost her, just this whole year, it's rocked our world, right? It's been a challenge, and that might be an understatement. To suffer something that big, it's tough. And throughout this, we've continued to try to be faithful to God, right? Faithful to his church. And there's people who come to us and they say, man, we've just been so encouraged by your faith. We've been so encouraged by your strong faith throughout this whole thing. And friends, let me say, we so need that encouragement. We so appreciate that encouragement. We so welcome that encouragement. But at the same time, when those things are said to us, I'm thinking to myself, when people say, man, you have such strong faith throughout this all, I'm thinking, my faith feels so weak at times, right? I feel like there are times this year with the loss of our daughter, with everything else going on in the world, I'm just like, I feel like I'm dragging my feet. Like I don't feel like this really strong cord that's like brand new and nice. I feel more like this cord, and my wires are exposed, and I don't always feel like that, but there are definitely days and even weeks this year where I felt like that, right? And it feels like my faith is weak. It feels like when I want to trust in God fully, I struggle to do so, and I revert to trusting in myself at times, and it's like this battle that I have, but that's just real life, right? It's hard. It's difficult. But this text has encouraged my wife and I this week because we realize it's not about having some sort of great faith all the time. It's about having faith in a great God. My cord, right? It's not about this. It's not about what it looks like. It's not about this. It's about the outlet. It's about the object of our faith that it's being put in. And so we're encouraged by that because we realize that we don't have to have a mountain-sized faith in the midst of hardship and loss and just in the midst of life, which is already difficult. But all we have to have is even just a minuscule amount of faith in a mighty God. We don't need great faith. We need faith in a great God. And so, friends, it's been an encouragement for me this week to study this passage, to get it into my own soul, and I pray that if you are discouraged because you feel like you have weak or little faith, I pray that you would be encouraged this morning, that you would realize you don't need some mountain-sized faith. All you need is minuscule faith, the size of a mustard seed, placed in a mighty God. It's not about how mighty your faith has to become. It's about how mighty God is. And so if you're discouraged about your faith because you feel like it's weak or little, don't focus so much on the cord. Focus on the outlet. Focus on the object that your faith is put into. A few more things for you. I just want to say this. As we're talking about a minuscule amount of faith, I don't want us to walk away this morning. I guess I shouldn't say walk away, but I don't want to conclude this morning thinking, man, all we have to have is minuscule faith in this life, and we just got to remain there, right? That's not the point of this text. All of us, as followers of Jesus, should desire to grow in our faith and mature in our faith, and by God's grace, we will, right? These last 4 months, there's been times where I feel like I have very minuscule faith, but I'm praying that God would help me grow in my faith and mature me, and I believe he has and will continue to do so. So the point of this text isn't to say you need minuscule faith, and that's it, and you need to stay there the rest of your life. We should desire to grow in that. But again, I'll just remind us, this text isn't saying you either have to have mustard seed-sized faith, minuscule faith, or mountain-sized faith. He's saying regardless if you have mustard seed-sized faith or mountain-sized faith, it's about the object of your faith and how mighty God is. And so place your faith in God. And I would say this, the longer that you're a Christian, I think the easier it is to become less dependent on God and more dependent on ourselves. We see this with the disciples. They've been walking with Jesus, and it's like their dependence and their trust has shifted from God to themselves, from upward to inward. And Jesus doesn't condemn them, but he's correcting them lovingly. And so I would just encourage you to keep your eyes on God. We don't grow out of depending on God. We grow as we depend on God. And so continually remember the outlet you're being plugged into. The object of your faith is God. Because anything else you put your faith in, whether it's yourself, your possessions, it's just like this outlet, right? With the red X. It's powerless, and it does nothing for you. So keep your faith focused on God. And lastly, I would just say this. I would address anyone who's listening or watching who's not a follower of Jesus. We talk about every human being, myself included in that, we need deliverance. And Jesus has the power to deliver. You can trust in things, you can trust in yourself, but again, whatever you trust in, if it's anything other than God, it's like this powerless outlet that doesn't work. It doesn't matter how awesome or strong your faith is. If it's in yourself, it's in the wrong outlet, right? If it's in your things, it's in the wrong outlet. And so I just encourage you, turn to Jesus, the one who has the power to deliver. And God can bring you from death to life, from darkness to light, and give you new life. It doesn't take this massive amount of faith. It takes a minuscule amount of faith in a mighty God to be saved. And so let me pray for us this morning, and then I would say we'll be dismissed and we can talk, but I guess we'll go about our days. So let me pray for us, and we'll continue on. Dear Father, I just thank you for your word. God, I pray that as we continually get in your word, that your word would continually get in us, sanctify us, grow us. Lord, I pray that you would save the lost and that you would sanctify the saved. Father, I pray as we talk about this concept of faith, more than just a concept, but the reality of faith, I pray that we would realize we don't need to have mountain-sized faith all the time. All it takes is a mustard-sized seed faith, and it's not because our faith is so strong, but it's because you are so strong, Lord, because you're infinite in love and power. And so I pray this morning, if there's anyone discouraged in their faith like I have been for these past several months, Lord, that they would be encouraged like I have through this text. God, that you are mighty, and that it's okay if our faith feels like this power or this cord over here that's stripped down and the wires are exposed and it doesn't seem super strong. God, you are constant, you are strong, you are trustworthy, you are dependable, and we love you and we thank you for who you are and for all that you do. And so, Lord, strengthen us in our faith, but ultimately help strengthen our belief and our trust in you. And so, Father, we love you. We thank you again for your word, and we pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.